Thanks, Dr. Kilby, for coming onto our podcast, and we're thrilled to have you. For our listeners, really, just do you want to say a little bit more about yourself and
Yeah,
what you specialize in?
yeah. First of all, thank you, Archie. It's lovely to join you. So I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, and I specialise in neurodivergence. I worked in the NHS for a long time, both NHS and privately, and now just predominantly private work, doing all age assessments for autism and ADHD.
I don't think I've actually asked you this question all these years I've known you, but what got you into this field, particularly of neurodiversity?
That's a really good question. So I don't think I knew much about neurodivergence. It's not something I'd sort of come across in my own sort of family experience when I was younger, or perhaps it wasn't really sort of spoken about. But I went to university in Birmingham, which I thought was very cold because I'm a bit of a softy southerner. And as students do, I had various jobs and things that I was, doing to sort of fund my way through university. And an advertisement went up in the psychology department looking for behaviour therapists to work with a young person, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old boy who had autism. And I interviewed for the post, and I myself and a couple of other psychology undergrads and a speech and language therapy undergrad created a team to work quite intensively behaviourally with this fabulous young man, age 6 around that time, after school and at the weekends. And he had what we probably would describe now as quite classical autism. So he didn't have any formal language, but he did communicate with Makaton and signs. And he had quite a lot of the classic stereotypies and stimming behaviours that we would see. So that was my kind of first introduction to autism. And it was really fabulous and left such an impression on me that when I finished my degree, I was really interested in development. I went on to do a master's in child development and then had some really fabulous jobs. I worked at Great Ormond Street in their sort of complex team and with children with epilepsy, where there was a strong overlap with the autism population. And from then on, I was sold. So when I went on to work in CAMS eventually, I gravitated to, to something I knew and I felt confident with, which was, working with autism and ADHD.
Wow. So are we going back over 20 years, aren't we? Like what you just described there.
Yes, yeah, that's a fair few years. Yeah, Archie,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, a few more than
yeah.
20.
And then obviously we met in camps, and I know you had been sort of you had already kind of come into the field before we sort of got to meet at that time. What have you seen over the years? Like if you go back to when you first came into this field and now, just in terms of like everything from a diagnostic point of view, in terms of how many
Yeah,
people are coming forward to be assessed, and what's the evolution been like for you? What have you noticed?
yeah. I mean, again, a really cracking question because I talk about this a lot because in many ways it feels like autism and ADHD are so much more, excuse me, spoken about and more known in the public. But for me, this is a 20 plus year career. And when I first started doing this, it was relatively uncommon. People didn't routinely know people with autism. It wasn't, spoken about or understood in the education system. And I would sum this up. I had a conversation with a family this week, and I would say when I first started my work, particularly in diagnostic services, it was potentially a bad day at work if you were going to have to say to a parent that this was the diagnosis that the team were recommending for their child, right? It was difficult. You were never quite sure how that was going to go, and it would be met with a range of emotions and often a lot of fear because parents didn't know, and it felt really overwhelming. And you were really starting the beginning of that journey to help parents understand. And now, talking to people and talking about diagnosis and describing it is a great day at work because people have come and they want you to help them in a process of understanding themselves, and they have often done a lot of that work already and they're quite a long way along that journey, and it feels a real privilege to join somebody at that point and to help make sense of something for them. It's a vastly different experience to the one I started with, which is fabulous. Interestingly now, and this was something I never would have encountered at the start of my career, now we have the experience where people might be coming forward for an assessment, and you might be saying clinically that you're less sure that the diagnostic threshold has been met. And that then might be a more difficult conversation. Or if you're framing people's presenting differences using a different paradigm or different explanations, that now, ironically, can be a more difficult conversation than discussing the neurodivergence, which is what they had come forward with as their original hypothesis.
When you hear, like, obviously, like, I don't know, in the media, there's a lot of talk around overdiagnosis of ADHD. What would you say to that? Do you think we're overdiagnosing, or are we just better at recognizing ADHD and autism now?
Well, you've rolled them into each other, so I probably might have different answers for those. What I find really hard, I'm a scientist at heart, right? So I'm going to go back to the data. And what I find difficult is I think the data that we have now is really out of date. If I'm trying to quote to people prevalence rates to try and give myself something to benchmark against, right? In a 3 form entry primary school, there are probably about 100 children per year. Like, this is the level of my entry level of maths. Archie, this is what I can manage, right? I probably wouldn't get through year 7 maths these days. So I'm like, okay, I can conceptualize that. I know what primary school looks like. I know what, 3 classes of 30 something children looks like. Okay, roughly how many of those could I expect to have ADHD or autism if we've got accurate prevalence data, just so that I've got some kind of calibration or benchmark in my mind? Because otherwise, how do we know what we're calibrating our figures against? Because the more experienced I become, presumably the more sensitive my radar becomes. So how do I know at the point at which I'm veering between population typical, as in, the edges of what looks like presentation of some neurodivergent features, into what then becomes clinical threshold, which is a meaningful diagnosis for people and for the people who are already in that population? So honestly, I think genuinely that is one of the challenges of our time. So I certainly have, and again, this is another conversation I was having this week. When I started my career, I mean, this is clearly telling your listeners, how outrageously old I am. Every diagnosis, everyone had dyslexia, everyone wanted to have dyslexia. It was not it wasn't dyslexia, but it was just such a known terminology. And at that point in time, people really didn't want to have ADHD. The public perception around ADHD was addictions or conduct disorder and people in the prison system. That's what the public perception of ADHD was. And the public perception of autism varied from associations with learning disabilities, so the reference to Rain Man from the film, or kind of other kind of severe impairments. But of the two, I think probably there was a greater willingness to explore discussions around autism. I would definitely say that that's changed. The I don't know who's done the PR drive behind ADHD, but they've done a sterling job, because there is now so much more information around ADHD. It's spoken about, it's known, there's information on the internet. I'm sure we could do an entire podcast on my views about the quality of the information on the internet about ADHD, because I find so much of that unhelpful and a bit confusing. But now there seems to be much more. Lots of people come forward saying, I think it's ADHD. And when you explore that, you discover that actually it's not, or it's broader than that. So that's definitely a big change. In terms of what that means to our diagnosis rates, it's really hard to know. Genuinely, it's really hard to know, because even knowing what I know of happening in the Southeast, which is where you and I are based, and I've got a pretty good sense of what colleagues are doing and what other services, the thing that's changed in our career lifetime is the introduction of what I'd call the kind of mass market providers, the really, really high volume providers, which without a doubt have got to be skewing the population data in one direction or another. Problem is we don't really have enough stats to know which way. And my biggest concern, absolutely hands down, my biggest concern is online providers. So very brief assessments that are done online, because I, as a clinician, am concerned about the quality of that. And if the quality is wrong, then potentially the clinical outcome is wrong, which it could be wrong in both directions. It could be increasing diagnoses or reducing diagnoses, but I don't think we've got any of the stats or the data to back up what's happening to that. So I think those are the big issues that we're currently facing.
Yeah, and like what you said, I agree. I think we can do a whole podcast on this, because I feel back in our days, when I remember when I came into this world, to this field, where for you to class yourself as a specialist in ADHD, you would have had a good number of years under your belt, assessing, diagnosing, working in that specialist services, working in the NHS and all of that. But nowadays, I feel there's a lot of specialists out there that would just do a course on ADHD and off they go, specializing and running a practice specializing in ADHD. So, yeah. And it's
Yeah.
not really well regulated as well. It's not like you could do like for autism,
Yeah.
you know, you have to do like an ADR or ADOS training, something that's
Yeah.
well recognized. For ADHD, we don't have something like that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm very mindful of balancing that tension between accessibility and quality. And I know that, you know, I have these
Yeah.
conversations with people a lot, and absolutely by no means do I want to restrict access. So I am positive about improving people's, you know, supporting people's right to have an assessment and improving accessibility, because, you know, quicker, accurate diagnosis helps people. But I am also mindful enough to know that there will be a commercial incentive driving other avenues of the market where the priority is probably more on volume than it is on quality. And as a clinician, an old school clinician by my own admissions, it's I struggle with it. I really struggle with it. Much like you grew up in, you know, the good old grounding of the NHS, where you worked in multidisciplinary teams and you were led by very senior psychiatrists and other, you know, healthcare professionals, and you really earned your stripes and you learnt your skills in the differential diagnosis, in how things can present. And it's that being trained in ADHD doesn't allow you to do an ADHD assessment. You've got to be trained in everything else as well, because an assessment is a differential assessment. It's always that. You're not saying, is it ADHD or not? You're saying, is it or is it not ADHD profile? Is it or is it not any other profile? And which of the profiles do you have available best fits the clinical background that you've got and the symptom profile and the developmental history? So it's no good just being trained in ADHD. You have to be trained in this whole field. And I had a beautiful example of this the other day, where we were assessing an adult. Interestingly, we were assessing the adult for autism. The adult had already been through a local adult assessment for ADHD where a diagnosis had been made. We did our autism assessment and we dug very deeply into the history. Interestingly, a lot of the history that the ADHD team passed over to us. And we, through that process, and the information was there, the ADHD team had access to it as much as we did, but that information indicated that there had been alcohol exposure, likely alcohol exposure in pregnancy. So immediately we had to put on the table the hypothesis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Now, because we are developmental clinicians and we look so broadly and we ground ourselves in that early developmental history and we go right back to birth and to pregnancy and all of those things, in a way that I think adult focused clinicians don't always do, we then brought this back, and then we had a completely different conversation about what the etiology of this person's kind of presentation might be about. And it's encounters like that that remind me that there is something very unique and important and, I don't know, specialist about what we as developmental specialists, as CAMS clinicians, as people who work with children and young people all the time, it trains us and it equips us and it grounds us in a different way than I think perhaps other colleagues or disciplines have. And I know it sounds rather elitist to sort of be quite privileged in that way, but I think it's so important that we can help the public identify what it is that is quite so specialist about what it is we can do.
No, I agree with you on that. You touched on some of the work you do with adults. You mentioned about prisons. Do you want to say a little bit more for our listeners what that entails?
So, I mean, you know, when I started out in my career, you know, people made the assumption between ADHD and the prison population. I think it was such an unhelpful, because what it did was it stopped people recognizing that ADHD presents across the whole spectrum of intellectual functioning and abilities and adaptive functioning, much like it does for autism. You know, anytime we've got a stereotype, it shines a light on one part of the complexity of the profile, but it probably leaves other groups out. And I remember spending a lot of time working against those stereotypes early on. And it's only really people coming forward. I mean, I think of Rory Bremner. He's probably not, you know, showing my age, but I remember very clearly him speaking about his diagnosis and thinking that is not the stereotype that people think about for ADHD. However, putting that other side of the coin away, we know the research tells us overrepresentation of ADHD in forensic services and in the prison population. And those are probably the most poorly served groups in terms of access to assessments, access to ongoing support, by nature of the fact that they are in prison, but also the difficulty of services then in reaching into those settings. So I've absolutely had the privilege of working across forensic services and going to many of the prisons in the south of England, really, and increasing awareness, providing support and training, and really helping that the people who support people in prisons understand some of the core challenges that people with undiagnosed ADHD face, and the way that that could be contributing both to the difficulties they have now, but also what led them to this point in their life.
Hmm. I remember that time when you were doing all of that. You're doing a lot of amazing work, and like what you said, and I think it's a space that I know. What's the other lady's? Dr. Susan Young as well, because she was kind of
Mm,
similar doing what you described there, and it just goes to show how there is this kind of forgotten society community
mm.
where there's all these offenders that are reoffending, going back to prison. Do you remember the days when we used to have youth offending teams? I remember
Yes,
having
I
working
do.
with some of these forensic type young people where they'll
What
end
do you
up
mean,
going.
do I remember the day? Are you telling me that we don't have them anymore? That's a very, very upsetting reality, Archie, if that's a
No, more
service we've
specific in
lost.
terms of like when we worked in Bromley,
Yeah, yeah.
that particular service as such. But yeah, do they still have youth offending teams and stuff? I'm not sure because I've been out of touch with the NHS, but
I know.
yeah,
Well, I'm really hoping that they do, but it's also distinctly possible they don't.
yeah, it's it's sad. I just want to move on to talk about your critically acclaimed series of The Secret Life of 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, which is on our
Yep,
TVs on Channel
yep.
4 over here in the UK. Um, for anyone who wasn't familiar with that show, which I was a big fan, and for you to be part of that show, can you give us an insight of how you ventured into kind of the media sort of TV world and what the show was all about, and what was your role within that?
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate. I started doing media work like a long time ago. So in 2007, 2008, I worked on a show called The All New House of Tiny Tearaways, which was when families and toddlers moved into a big old house, and we stayed resident with them and just helped them tackle everyday kind of toddler struggles. And it was through my connections and people that I knew through that work that I was approached and asked to join the team on Secret Lives, which was an amazing experience. I mean, it was such an opportunity, really, for me, because it's that kind of fly on the wall. I'm sure you go and do a classroom observation at school. Big children, little children, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're as inconspicuous as they come. I mean, there's no way that you're sliding around the edge of that classroom wall without anyone spotting you. I mean, you don't get across the threshold without 30 pairs of eyes on you. So you very rarely get to observe something without the fact that you're observing it impacting what's happening. And the joy of Secret Lives was because of the way that the rig was set up and the sort of the amount of cameras that we had, it meant we really, really could watch the children in as close to them doing their own thing as we were ever going to get. And for me, that was the absolute sell. That's what I adored about doing that work.
And you did you did quite a few seasons, didn't you? Because you did, as
Yes.
you said, there are different age groups from 4 all the way to 6, didn't you?
Yep. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and what was the sort of message behind it? What was it that you're trying to get from that show?
So I think it was that sort of natural, because even parents, when they're watching their children, don't get to see what their children do when they're not watching them. So it was all of that kind of naturalistic observations, but also it was just bringing the magic of small children's worlds to everyone, because we forget, right? We grow up and we're not children anymore. We forget what playing is, and so much of parenting is demand heavy. There's a lot of instruction giving in parenting. You don't get many moments to kind of sit back and relish in the joy of children just being children. And so it was that amazing kind of a little window into their world to see what they do. And for me, I mean, it was barely a day's work. It certainly wasn't an effortful day's work to go and watch them, because they were hilarious and they were
Yeah, I
funny,
remember.
and they were like endless amounts of energy, and they were just it was such an amazing reminder of what development is. And I as you all know, as we spend a lot of our working career with people with developmental difference, and so actually after a while you do kind of forget what typical development looks like, even though that's what our training grounds us in, and that's what we're always trying to sort of make those comparisons against. And so just to be able to watch children doing what children do in all of the normal ways that they do it was I mean, it was a career high. It was just fabulous.
Yeah. And I mean, in that unique sort of setting, did it sort of review any kind of some of the challenges that we described with ADHD, for example, with attention, impulse control, emotional regulation? Did you, and obviously you can't really physically go in there specifically looking for that or diagnose particularly 4-year-olds, but um, did anything strike you or surprise you when you're observing that you thought this is
It,
interesting?
it yeah, well, it just sort of reminded me how having a short attention span is really normal when you're 4. Like it just helps sort of recalibrate me back, I think, as to what, my friends, family, children joke that I can find neurodivergence in a lamppost, such as my sensitivity these days. So it was really helpful to kind of just go back to basics and go, no, hang on a minute, let's just calibrate back. Also, the thing that was such a brilliant reminder for me is that so much of development just happens by itself. And as adults, we sort of forget that we need to get out of the way a little bit. Children not dissimilar to plants. If you feed them and put them in the light, they will grow. Like, I mean, I know that sounds a bit flippant, but actually, it's a really helpful reminder that children come with a whole set of sort of impetus or drive to develop. They're curious. They're going to explore the world. They're going to seek things out. They're going to touch everything. They're going to see how that works and put those things on top of each other and just everything. They are just naturally curious, world exploring beings. And actually, most of what we need to do is just give them plenty of space to be able to do that. And their development is going to take them in that direction. And just watching them do that, 8 hours a day made me remember actually that's what children are here to do. They're here to play and they're here to learn.
I know you were doing some filming out abroad as well, outside of the UK, because obviously the program started in the UK.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of sort of different spin-offs that happened in different parts of the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. So I went over to the States and filmed what they called Secret Life of Kids, which had slightly older children. So we had 5, 6, and 7. And I think that's partly in reflection because they start school at a slightly later cohort. Um, I mean, the cultural differences were really sort of fascinating. The sort of things, the topics, the interests that the children bring. So there was we rarely in the UK ever had any reference to, like, we didn't have a lot of reference to football or key sports, but American football, absolutely. So all of the kind of big sports, ice hockey, all of those things. So all of those children would kind of incorporate that into their play. That was really interesting. Um, and obviously, even though we both speak English, huge language barrier. That was kind of, them talking about the trash can and all those other kind of phrases that they use, whereas I was kind of going, can we translate that into English? So that was that was always fun. Um, but yeah, and just the culture of foods, that was super interesting to see how they incorporated that. And just the energy levels, I would definitely say energy levels were kind of higher, like almost like an uptick of just like I was getting worn out just kind of watching these guys. So that was also really interesting to me.
Are we going to see a comeback of the show at some point? What are they sort of thinking at the moment?
Yeah, yeah. So there was recently a filming. So Paul and Laverne, two of my co-hosts, fabulous colleagues, they have just done a very short series of episodes around the environment and children's understanding of the environment, which I think are being released as YouTube shorts. So definitely keep an eye out for those because those were fabulous. And it's really interesting to see what even really young children understand about the environment and how we promote environmental causes and the sort of level of responsibility they take for doing their bit for the environment.
Hmm. Uh, did they win an award at all?
Well, we were nominated for a BAFTA. I did get to go to the BAFTAs, Archie. It was absolutely fabulous. And we came second to First Dates, which I felt was a fair winner. I feel like that was like I could live with that. That was pretty cool.
At least you got to go to the BAFTAs and yeah, see.
Right? It was good.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, just moving on from that, you currently working in schools, obviously working with young people and
Yep.
things and supporting the education staff. Do you want to tell us a bit more about where you are now with your current role with schools and education system?
Yep. Yeah, so I work in a school 1 day a week, and as a sort of member of staff, which is really, really interesting. Sort of having spent all my career in NHS systems, joining the education system kind of from the inside has just given me unbelievably valuable insight, really into what teachers face and kind of how the system works, and really management. I think my recommendations around management support and classroom support, all of those things, significantly better having spent time working in a school. But I also consult to lots of other schools. Myself and my team will go into schools. There's regular schools that we visit, but also schools can contact us and ask us to come in to do training, to do observations, to do assessments. For me, having grown up in a career in the NHS, I always saw my partner agency as education, and I am absolutely vehemently committed to assessments have to be done in conjunction with education partners, because they see children in context, in their setting, and the information that they give us is vital to doing an accurate assessment.
And are you focusing mainly on neurodiversity then when you're doing your work
Yeah,
in schools? Yeah.
yeah, 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 definitely. So doing observations, signposting, early identification, onwards referrals, strategies, helping develop, individual learning plans, all of those kind of things. But absolutely, I mean, what you and I both know, once you've got a background in the NHS and we've come from CAMS and we've got a mental health background, of course, I can do that kind of mental health work. But what increasingly I found was the children that were presenting, a significant chunk of the children presenting with mental health or pastoral needs were also children who fit under the umbrella of SEND and likely had some neurodivergence. And actually, the important thing was to address that, because that then improved their mental health. And so it doesn't matter what I end up going into a school to do, I find myself back at neurodivergence, because it's a bit like all roads lead that way in terms of what I can bring
Mm.
my expertise and understanding. And it's often such a helpful framework to to put to give a sense of why these difficulties are the way they are. And through that lens, you can actually suddenly make some really significant improvements.
So is it more like early intervention then, like more like what we used to call tier two when we worked in the NHS?
A school might have a young person that they're concerned about, or they've got some queries, or they've got something that's particularly challenging. So sometimes it's really because schools are so much more knowledgeable than they used to be. So sometimes it's really because they've tried lots of stuff already and they're not sure. So they want somebody to come in and try and look at things that they haven't considered. Other times it's school coming in, because you and I know the waiting times to get into NHS systems now are so high. And not only that, I think the referral process, the sort of gatekeeping processes at the front door now are so much tighter that actually schools need to provide a wealth of evidence even to make a referral. So part of what we can do as going in is to help schools gather that information, collate it in a coordinated fashion, write it in the language of diagnostic criteria, because that then speaks to the service that they're presenting to. And so help them get through the front door, signpost parents. I mean, it's a genuine minefield out there now in terms of providers, intervention services, all those kind of things. So actually spending some time with a parent, just laying the landscape out and helping them navigate. I think you've got to be an expert patient these days to get through the system, and giving
Yeah.
parents support and guidance around that, hugely valuable.
Yeah. And I wish more schools can have someone like you. I wish you could spread yourself across
Oh,
so many schools,
yeah,
honestly, because that's
yeah,
definitely something that's needed. I'm not sure how
yeah.
it's obviously it's a private school you work in. Um,
So the school I'm at is an independent setting, but we visit both state and independent schools. Sometimes we're funded to go in by parents, sometimes we're funded to go in by the school. So there's a variety of different sort of creative methods, but explaining some research. And it really sticks with me. The research showed that the higher level of expertise you have at the beginning of a pathway, not only the better, but the quicker that person's journey through the system is. Yet most systems are created the other way around. You meet less senior clinicians at the beginning of your journey. And if your case is more complex, then you work your way through the system and you get to see. But that takes a very long time. And actually, the research is really clear on this. If you can front load your assessment pathways, your systems, in fact, any system with your most senior or experienced clinicians, you make that journey quicker and better. And that, I think, probably that had such an impact on me that has always stayed with me. So I have, I've worked in CAMS, I've worked in tier two, tier three, I've been into tier four settings. What I choose to do now is to go almost a bit grassroots about it and almost go into sort of universal services, schools, health clinics, those kind of centres where actually I'm doing what the research said, which is bringing expertise to the front door, to the point of entry, and it invariably does make things go better. And that's been my career experience. And so that's really, I think, the passion about why I do the way I do it now.
And talking generically, if you think about education system and we talk about neurodiversity, and I hear this a lot from parents as well, um, a lot of people feel, and I don't know if you agree, but the education system doesn't fit neurodiverse young people, the way they're learning, the duration of the lessons, how, the teaching is delivered to them. There's a lot of sitting down, longer lessons, less opportunities for moving about, and just maybe
Yeah.
trying to think about it in a creative way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have a chance to influence the side of things in
Yeah.
terms of what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. So again, it does feel like, I often make this comment that attention directing your attention isn't just so much about the effort of the person directing it. There is a certain amount of responsibility for what I call attentional grab. It's easier for your attention to be grabbed onto something that's more interesting, right? So we live in generation iPhone, generation Xbox, PlayStation 5. It's noisy and it's loud and it's interactive and it's VR headsets, right? Versus a teacher standing at the front giving it some chalk and talk. Like you're not on a level playing field. Like this generation, like just have a higher threshold of, come on, sir, show me what you've got. Like I get that. And so how do you then do that piece of work where you help the setting understand that it's a shared responsibility? Attentional control is a responsibility of the attentional grab as well as the attentional direct. And actually, if you can come at it from, I think, Archie, confession time, I think probably I'm a sort of, family therapist at heart, really, because I nearly always believe it's a both and position, right? I kind of go to that routinely in every dilemma I face. You know, the solution to this is going to be both what we can do with the child and what we can do with the setting. And we're going to be most successful if we can get both of those working in the same direction. And it's really important to take that shared responsibility because it takes the blame, the onus, the pressure, the stress off something linear. You've got to do that, or they've got to do that, or he's got to do that, or she's got to change in that way. Actually, people can really get on board when you talk about collaborating, when you talk about shared responsibility, when you talk about working together, because you immediately get people out of that feeling under pressure or feeling blamed. And so when I come into a school, my approach is very much like, okay, I'm here to help. What can we all do? I can't. I remember so clearly, and you will know this as well, sitting around so many meetings in CAMS, maybe, 6, 8 professionals around a table, right? And I'll just do a quick maths. Maths is terrible, but I'll do a quick, like how much money is sat around the table for a 1-hour meeting with all these professionals, right? Really experienced senior people talking about a child, 11-year-old child, right? And what the 11-year-old child needs to do differently. And I would be sitting there thinking, they are the least powerful person in this system. Like they have got the least resource to be able to change. Like surely we as the adults can give this a go first. And so it's about coming into the system going, okay, what can we do with the child, for the child, but about the child? Like how can we work together to change this? And that would definitely be, and that's the approach in the school that I work in, but that's absolutely my approach when I go in to consult to other schools.
It sounds like a social care approach with a team around the child.
Yeah.
So it's got that element, that feel to it.
Yeah.
If you had a magic wand or the power to change the education system, particularly for neurodiverse young people, how would you change it? How would you go about it?
I mean, that's a big ask, isn't it? I think I probably have had the answer to that. I might have copyrighted it and patented it already. Um, I think it is going back to what I'm saying about changing the paradigm, because it is about, it is about collaboration. It is about creativity. It is about being able to take a position to say, like, how can we do that differently? And it seems like such an easy thing to say, but there is so many layers and so much fear and shame and stuckness, and this is how we do things around here, and kind of pressure in the system that makes it really hard for the system to change. So when I look at a school, if they've got stuck, I'm like, there'll be a reason why they're stuck. What are the external pressures on this school that are meaning that they feel that they have to operate in this way? Is this about results? Is this about resources? Is this about parental pressure? And it's about being able to, life is so busy, you never get that opportunity to stop. And that's what a consultation is. It's like you suspend time and reality and say, look, let's just take everything off the table. What could we do differently here? How could we think about this differently? And it's about bringing in that thinking. So if I ran the world, what would I give schools? How would I support schools to approach things differently? It would be that permission to kind of stop and think, to understand the pressures that they're under, and then how that's influencing how they're supporting their young people. And then, I don't know, a bit of passion to say to them, okay, because I think that schools usually know their own answers. It's just that they're not given permission to enact them. And there are some creative people in education. Like I would not consider myself a creative person. One of my joys of going into schools is just how much creativity that kind of, teachers can really bring. And like when you can release that a little bit and go, okay, come on, how would you solve this? What would you come up with? Like teachers know children, right? If I want to know something about a child, I go and ask a teacher. They spend their whole working day with children. They are perfect at benchmarking this child versus children of the same age. They are like on point. So if you can get back into that passion, that interest, that energy, what brought you to teaching, give me some ideas, come on, like that. I would want to re-inject that back into the education system. I'd want to go to the government and say, the structure, the rigor, the league tables, the results, like I get why you're doing it, but I think it's crushing some of the creativity out of the system. And if one thing that neurodivergence needs, it needs creativity, it needs flexibility, it needs adaptability, it needs a willingness to do things differently. I think that that's there, but I think something about the wider system is stopping that being expressed.
And the pressure that the teachers are under as well. And I feel teachers sometimes they say, we have to be psychologists, we have to be therapists, we have to be social workers, we have to be.
Yeah.
It feels like there's all these layers that are put on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're the last man standing in a statutory system. You and I have already made that joke, do youth offending services still exist? No one says do schools still exist? Like every other services around them can get cut. We've talked about tier 2 services anymore. Those are a dying art. So if you think about all of the other infrastructure that would have been around schools, certainly when we started in our career, and those things are not available. And so it only leaves schools picking up the slack for that. So I have a huge amount of sort of compassion and understanding for where schools are at. Equally, I can absolutely hear and understand parents and children's experiences of when that's not working and when that's not going well. And you and I will both know that the rates of, reduced school attendance are at a level that are unprecedented. We have never seen this level of what we call emotionally based school avoidance, which is children for whom being able to attend school is not working for them at the moment. So I do think we are absolutely at a pinch point. Something's got to change. We can't continue as we are.
Yeah. So just kind of progressing from there, really. You touched on earlier we were talking about research, and you have some exciting news to share.
I do. I really. Okay. So, I mean, I don't quite know how I fit any more days in the week, but I'm a scientist practitioner at heart. I do genuinely believe in this. And I think I've talked about it, here through this podcast, what does the data tell us? What does the science tell us? I'm really driven by that. So I am very excited. So we have just got ethics approval to run a clinical research trial using an alternative biomarker to help us in the assessment and detection of ADHD. And so historically, all of the tests that you would use, things that people would be familiar with, like what we call continuous performance tests, something like the Kilbey, where it taxes attentional control through the delivery of a rather boring game of Snap. In fact, possibly the world's most boring game of Snap. I have worked with Dutch researchers based in Spain, to develop something called brain gaze, which looks at eye vergence. It looks at the very small micro movements of the eyes. Now, we know through other modalities like EMDR that eye movements are really strongly linked to brain processing and neurobiology. So we have developed a test in which, much like something like the QB, the participant watches the screen and is focuses on a central image, and in the periphery other images will appear, and the task is to keep your eyes focused centrally. And it's by watching or tracking the tiny eye movements to see how those move across the screen and whether you can sustain that central attentional control, we can, with a really high degree of accuracy, predict whether individuals are falling within the ADHD profile or not. And this has already been evidenced and received FDA approval in Spain. And we are now running a UK trial to get the same clinical ratification with UK data. But what is really exciting about the iVergence is that we are now developing an intervention arm, meaning young people or adults can play a screen-based game, either on a mobile device or on a VR headset, in which they train their eye movements. And the evidence base says that it has a sustained effect on improved attention and concentration. So this could be one of the first really effective non-pharmacological. So there are a number of products on the market. A lot of them are behaviorally oriented. This is the first one that uses a biomarker in this way, delivered through the medium of technology in a way that is both quick and accessible.
So so how would you see that sitting in when we think about doing assessments, for example? So you would still go ahead and do how we do assessments now, but you add the objective testing to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Right.
I would see it as it's a really valuable way of, and it's not only can you use it in the assessment process, so it gives you really good baseline data. So we can use it as, and again, an assessment should never be a one tool thing. An assessment, as you know, should be led by an expert clinician using multiple sources of data. So we absolutely still want to hear from schools and from parents and from the young person themselves, but this is another really important source of data. And actually it can be used at the clinical screening process in the way that QB data can't, because QB check is not a clinical screener, it's only part of an assessment battery. So the ability to offer early detection screening could have a massive impact on waiting times for people who are on waiting lists that perhaps don't need to be there, and could go off and explore other hypotheses for their difficulties. But through the data that we gather through the test of determining which clinical group people fall in, we are then gathering the data we need to train the computer and the AI algorithms that then build the game that teaches the eye tracking techniques. So actually it could become a really valuable tool for people sat on waiting lists waiting for NHS treatment where they're getting no intervention at all. But also NHS, NICE guidance says mild to moderate behavioural and psychological interventions first. This would absolutely fall in that bracket. And so therefore we could, if there are sufficient clinical gains, head off a group of children who may then never need pharmacological interventions.
I'm just thinking of some of the objective testing you mentioned, QB. Obviously, the three things that they will tend to highlight, like commission errors, the omission errors, which is the inattention, the commission, which is impulsivity, and motor control, which is explained by the hyperactivity. With the eye movement, that's more focusing around concentration. Or is it also picking up like impulsivity and hyperactivity?
So, because the test lasts about 15 minutes or so, you can use it in the classic QB continuous performance test. So you can still get the computer, because it uses eye tracker, to measure body movements, and so you get a hyperactivity score, and the person performs a task. So when they see images in the periphery, then they would hit the space bar if there was a match or not a match. So it has all of the features of a standard continuous performance test, but the power is in the ability of the computer to track these very tiny eye movements. And amazingly, it can show that the extent to which the pattern of eye movements, particularly the eye vergence. So in order to process a piece of information, the eyes do this very, very tiny, imperceptible micro shuffle. And that means that the information has both been inputted but then processed in the brain. And the camera can detect those movements to see where the eyes are falling in order to process information. And there is clear evidence to show that there are patterns of eye vergence and eye processing that are specific to ADHD that are not seen in non-ADHD populations.
That sounds exciting.
I know. I tell you what, it's
Yeah,
it's it's neuroscience at a level that I can't comprehend, and that is me explaining it to you, like spending the last year and a half learning about this. That's for a long time. All I was able to say is it's the divergence, and that was the sum total of my knowledge. So to get
yeah.
this far after 18 months, Archie, is a phenomenal achievement. I definitely couldn't say any more than that, but I know some super clever people that can.
When do we expect to see this like being potentially rolled out?
Yeah. I mean, super excited. So the trial is running now. It's, as you know, we need a big sample size to make really good clinical predictions. So we're hoping to run that over the next year. But actually, we are developing the uh, data now to do beta trial rollout. So anyone that is interested in either the game, the eye movement training game that we believe has, or we can evidence has effects on attentional control, definitely reach out and contact us. And also, we are hoping to begin a trial of implementing brain gaze into Scottish NHS pathway, because they don't use objective measures at the moment. So absolutely, we're at the stage now where we're looking at a beta rollout of the product. So, we are hoping to get this into clinics as an alternative objective measure. It's a quicker test than the QB, and it's usually better tolerated because the QB, I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, but
Yeah,
it's definitely 20 minutes of your life that you're never going to get back.
yeah,
Pretty long 20 minutes.
yeah. And obviously you need the space and the for the equipment and all of that to set
Yes.
up. And obviously they've got like a portable kind of version that they've created of that. But
Yeah.
I kind of get what you mean by that. So yeah, we shall see. Hopefully, maybe we can bring you back on this podcast once
Give you an
you've
update.
you have more information on it.
And I promise I'll try and say something a little bit more than it's the divergence. So next time I come back, I'll have some crib notes on some proper science.
Yeah, exactly, and probably some data as well. You can give us.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I don't know where you find the time, honestly. How do you juggle from working in a school to do all your
Yeah.
clinical work and doing the research, and also you're an author? I was just about to ask you
Yes.
on that. So,
Yeah.
Unplugged Parenting. You wrote that
Yes.
book,
Yeah.
fabulous
I
book,
did. I
recommended for
know.
parents. Yeah. Do you want to tell our
Thank you so
listeners?
much. I did.
Um,
So I read about parenting in the sort of digital age, and even a few years later, it feels remarkably out of date because we had a pandemic and our whole relationship with sort of technology changed. So yes, it's a kind of guide for parents thinking about how they introduce tech to their children. That first point at which you're bringing. I mean, it used to be a mobile phone ready for secondary school, but actually we realised that children have access to iPads and tablets at a way younger age than that. So it's really about helping parents navigate that minefield. And I would always give the example of, like, you wouldn't necessarily bring mountains of unrefined sugar into your house and give your child kind of, unfettered access to that. Kind of, maybe think about the internet a little bit like that, and thinking about, you're bringing something in to join your family, but how are you going to define the boundaries and the relationships around that? But Archie, there is books that I've written that I want to tell you about that I am even more proud of. Not that I'm not proud of my Unplugged Parenting book, of course I am, but the book I really want people to go and look at is, I was given the amazing opportunity of co-writing some Mr. Men books. And that has been a joy. I can't tell you. Please go. So we wrote a whole series of Mr. Men books called the Discover You series, which tackles all kinds of things that children encounter all the time, like jealousy and being different and worrying and being cross and all of those fabulous things. And they are genuinely fab, and I am beyond proud of them. So please do go and look up the Discover You series, because the books are brilliant. All the same characters that we'd all know and love,
yeah.
just encountering day-to-day challenges in a bit of a different way.
That's amazing. You just reminded me of that. I've got a couple sitting on my bookshelf in my office. So
Yeah,
yeah, well done you. I can remember.
I
Speaking of
love them.
technology, obviously you working in schools, working with young
Yeah,
people. I don't know if you've been hearing. Obviously, in the last week or so, there's been a lot of talk, social media, on TV. The TV show Adolescent.
I knew you were going to say that.
And yeah, rightfully so. I just want to get your thoughts as a psychologist, certainly, and also working in the schools,
Yeah,
and this whole kind of technology world that we live in, and the bullying and the incel culture. What's your thoughts on that?
so much, isn't it? So it's such a tough watch. I mean, a tough watch for someone inside the industry, really. I think it's a tough watch for absolutely everyone. I mean, it's eye-opening. It's beautifully made. The camera work. I keep hearing all about how they filmed everything in one shot, which kind of explains that slightly seasick feeling I get sometimes when they kind of whiz around a shot.
Yeah,
I mean, how fantastic and brave and courageous and utterly necessary to bring this meaty topic to everyone's attention in this way. I mean, as uncomfortable and difficult and challenging as it is to watch, it's also completely necessary that we're having these conversations, that we're aware of this, that we can bridge that generational gap. Because part of the problem of working with adolescents, as you know, is the entire genre of adolescence is that whole point of making everybody else not cool. By default, we are not, we're old, we're not cool, right? If I kind of start using some of the language I pick up from my own children, they're like, stop doing that, because we're gonna have to find different words now because they're not for you. This is not, go back to Facebook, mum. This is not for you. So the whole point is about being kept out of that, because otherwise it's not interesting for young people. They want to be different. It's got to be a bit risky and it's got to be a bit on the edge. So how are we going to bridge that gap of getting into knowing what they're looking at and accessing that culture and being in touch with that, if we don't bring these really difficult topics to the table and begin to look at it? Because this is tough stuff for parents to have to look at and to think about and to engage with. So yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, I know people who watched all 4 episodes in one go. That wasn't me. I had to kind of do them one at a time with some sort of lying down and slow breathing in between.
And that particular episode 3, as you watched with the psychologist, as you say, one take, that I think everything about it, the young lad who's playing Jamie, amazing
Mhm.
job. And
Yep.
yeah, I think it got me, it got me thinking in terms of, like, I like how they did it. Like, obviously, we knew it wasn't like a who done it sort of thing. It's like there is a
Yep.
trying to understand a young lad like him, because I initially, when I saw the first episode, I didn't think he was guilty. I thought they got the wrong person, honestly.
Yep. Yeah.
And that was the fascinating part of it, that it was more like a lot of us were looking at it and going, no, it's not him. And then you saw the video, and then we're trying to get into his head to understand, and then everything else started to unravel. And then you got this school
Yes.
situation going on as well. So,
Yep.
as you say, it's tough for young people, and it's right. I'm a parent as well. It's hard when you have
Yes.
young people, and you feel like you got your. I felt for the dad. Honestly, I think it's a reaction where he's probably thinking he's let his son down. He's questioning himself as a dad. There was a lot there you can look at and go, wow. I think as a lot of parents are saying, I want to check on my child a bit more. But
Yeah.
is that the right approach? Is it, as a parent, what would you be advising after watching the show? How can we respond?
So I think it's about those conversations, isn't it? It's about, I mean, trying to talk to teenagers is, it's not easy, deliberately so, but it's about finding a way to start having those conversations, to be curious, I think a lot of the time when we bring conversations to teenagers, we come with all of our kind of adult, assumptions and perceptions and responsibilities and sort of judgments. It is actually really difficult to put all of that down for a minute, to put that aside and to sort of genuinely, create some space to say, okay, I want to hear it from your point of view. I want to know what it's like. I'm going to sort of, keep stum and I'm going to listen. And so the show is a beautiful example to say, actually, if you watched it, can we have a chat about that? What did that, what was your perceptions? What did it bring up for you? What do you know? What's going on in your school? Is there any, what stories have you got? What can you tell me? Even if it's about a friend, air quotes, a friend, like I want to hear it. I'm interested. And I just don't think, we day-to-day life, how often do we get to do that? How often do we get to, yeah, how often do we get to say to sort of young people, does that ever happen to you? Or do you know that everyone that's happened, online bullying or the messaging, or does that go on at your school? Do people say that? Like, it just, ask questions and be prepared to give it some time. The first time you ask this stuff, you might get a few kind of raised eyebrows or funny looks, but actually, okay, let's persevere, let's stick with it. I want to know, I'm interested.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just having the own open conversations, as you said, like the dialogue, and starting from early. You know,
Yeah,
as we know, like young people, obviously they like to retreat to themselves, and they don't think it's cool to open up to their parents.
yeah,
They tend to see their peers more as they'll look up to them.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
get it, but I think as a parent, you can do as best as you can and just try to be there, like
yeah,
encouraging those conversations. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a reference point where you can literally, if they watch it, you can use it as a reference point to start the conversation from there.
yeah.
So yeah,
But
yeah, go on.
I always have what I call with my children, they're a bit bigger now, but when they were younger, I'd call them like, I'd call it the black cab rules, right? As opposed to Uber. Let me explain. So first of all, I'm always genuinely delighted to drive my children around anywhere because they don't want to spend time with me anyway. But I am a free ride, so this is my in, right? But we play black cab rules versus Uber rules. So in the Uber, you kind of sit in the back, and Uber drivers, as a general rule, quiet. They're not bothering you, giving you your peace, right? You can sit there, get on your phone, do whatever. Black cab drivers, those people are chatty, right? So if you're in my car, we're black cabbing it. You're getting a free ride, but we're chatting. This is not an Uber. Put your phone in your pocket, get on the bus. Like that, no phones in the car. Because if I can't have my phone, why are you having yours? Because I've got to concentrate on the road. So it would be like, yes, I can give you a lift, black cab rules. Because we're going to try and have a chat about it. And that it's just those little windows of time, it's that taking that opportunity. Yeah, I'll run you there because I know that you're a captive audience and we're going to be able to have a chat. It doesn't have to even be that serious. It can be about anything, but it's you're building that relationship all that time, which gives you the groundwork to then try and you're on a better platform to start having more serious conversations when you want to.
I've had mixed feedback from some parents. Some parents went to the extreme of like, right, I'm going to take my child's phone away, and they're not going to have social media, stop them from going out, and all of that. I
Yeah.
don't think I don't know. It's for me personally, I feel it's a bit extreme. I think you want to have that trusting relationship with the young person where they still have their freedom at the end of the day. They're teenagers, but they are comfortable, hopefully, to be able to open up and come to you and talk to you about it. Because, yeah, they'll just find other ways of reaching out to their friends,
Yep.
even if you take their phones. You know what young people are like.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to take this
Yep.
away. I'm going to find another route. So, yeah,
Yep.
fascinating.
They're
Honestly, I just want.
resourceful.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
what's next for yourself, really? I know you talked about the research, which is amazing. Just any other
Yeah.
exciting projects? Any ventures
Yeah.
to come?
So I've been very lucky. My team have been able to work on an NHS waiting list. So we took on the local NHS waiting. We won the tender, and we've done 675 adult assessments in 18 months, which has been pretty intense. But it is a piece of work that I am so proud of, and so we did all of those assessments in person. So really, in contrast to what's being offered by some of the big providers. And I think at the moment, I feel so passionate about being able to offer people quality assessments through the NHS or through the NHS tender process. That's what people were offered when we started out in our career. That's the minimum that people should be able to expect. They should be able to access quality at volume. And it really, really worries me that that isn't what's being provided. And it really worries me that there's a real sort of drive. There's a few pieces of research that get recycled a lot, and a lot saying, these are effective and they're accurate. Absolutely. If the volume and the body of the research community says that's the case, great, I'm excited about that. But my worry is, as an on the ground clinician, based on what I see, my worry is that that is not always the case. So I would love to be able to mobilize myself, colleagues, people like you, to try and influence that process to ensure that we retain quality at the NHS, because fundamentally that's what I believe in. That's what I was brought up with as you were, Archie. I remember one of my very senior colleagues used to say to me that she was like a stick of rock, right? If you broke her in half, it would say NHS all the way through. Like
Yeah,
that's the era that I grew up in. So
yeah.
I want to, just because I'm now in private practice doesn't mean that I have lost that passion to support schools and education, to support grassroots organisations, to support the NHS in whatever way. I have got a huge amount of skills and energy to bring, and I want to bring it to those pathways. So I will continue to try and move into that space, to try and influence that process, to try and keep quality and high quality in-person assessments where appropriate as part of that offer to the public, because I think that that's what people deserve.
So your private practice, is it the Can Centre?
Yep. So I am very lucky. So I have got two practices, one in Southeast London, which is my Dr. Kilbey practice. And then we also have an associate practice in Southwest London, which is called the Can Centre. So which is run by a team of associates. So that is the mechanism through which we do the vast majority of our kind of neurodevelopmental assessments and work into schools. And for our NHS work, we have a service called the Autism Assessment Service, which was the service that provided the NHS tender. So that's, again, another route through which we can bring together. And it's, for me, I've been around long enough that I've got so many colleagues and connections the joy of this work is working with people who I know, who are so experienced, who I respect their work, and it's about bringing those colleagues together now. Creating what looked like what you and I would recognise as old-fashioned NHS multidisciplinary teams. That's what
Yeah.
we create now, and that's what's so fabulous. And again, maintaining these connections, the connection with you and your team, accessing high-quality prescribing colleagues, which is not something that psychology can do. And again, something I worry enormously about, whether that's being sufficiently regulated. I want to have access to colleagues who prescribe really responsibly, who I know have got a strong background in CAMS. So again, for me, I want to move forward, building those networks and building a real grassroots network of organisations with like-minded people that hold the same values, where we know the quality of the work we're doing.
And I think that's the challenge when it comes to service users trying to access these particular services in the independent sector. They don't know where to go.
Yeah,
You and me know, obviously, what you just described, I 100% agree with that. But if you're a person who's new to this and you're Googling and you come across Dr.
yeah,
So-and-so, you don't know anything about them. You don't know, you
no,
can't separate between the experts who worked in the NHS and someone who's just
yeah,
done a course on ADHD
yeah,
2 weeks ago.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's the way the issue is.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that, but the broadening of the professions that can get involved in assessment and prescribing. So the introduction of clinical pharmacists involved in the
Yeah,
prescribing process, which I understand, but also the assessment process, which conventionally you and I wouldn't have been familiar with it from an NHS background. So
yeah,
all of, and I understand the importance of, again, it's that point about increasing access, but also it's really remembering where the skills and expertise lie. So I, as much as the information about neurodivergence is increasing, what I really want is for patients to have equal access to understanding the different disciplines, understanding what a good assessment looks like, understanding the makeup of an assessment team, the kind of information that should be gathered, just so that when you're approaching different providers, and I want people to have access to the wide market, that they know what standards they're benchmarking that against.
if people want to reach out to you, find out more about your fantastic work, how can they get
Yay!
hold of you?
So absolutely. So the CAN Centre website, so that's CAN Centre, has got a fantastic website, and also my own private practice, the Dr. Kilbey practice. We are just revamping our website because nowadays, I'm so old, my website was built very originally what my children now call a very BTEC website that needs a significant upgrade. So we are in the process of redoing our website to make it look a little bit more like everyone else's. Probably not the way to go. But yeah, so if that's not live at the moment, it will be, but we can be contacted through the CAN Centre, or our contact information is actually available. Stick us into Google and you'll find us.
Yeah, and I'll add the details in the podcast description as well for people to
Yeah,
easily reach out to
fabulous.
you. Are you on
Thank you,
social
Archie.
media by any chance?
Well, shock horror, I'm not. And this is a really interesting stance I've taken, kind of from, I don't know, from the get-go, really. I'm not a fan for all the reasons that we've just talked about in this podcast about why I'm a little bit skeptical about how good it is for people's mental health. So I figured I should practice what I preach and wrote about in my book. So I don't do socials. How long I'll hold that stance for, who knows?
Well, you will be on our socials after this.
Hey!
There you go. First time for everything. So, um, anything else you want to mention before I let you go?
Nothing, just to say thank you so much. It's so lovely to reach out to colleagues and people who share the values and are still putting forward all the some kind of great ideas around ADHD, and just the importance of people being able to access really high quality assessments and timely treatment. So we really value that kind of working relationship with yourself and the support around prescribing. So yeah, just to say thank you, and it's lovely to have colleagues nearby.
And yeah, great to catch up. I know we haven't spoken for quite a number of years. I know we've been exchanging emails from time to
Yeah,
time, but it's been great to see you and
yeah.
great to have you as a guest on our
Thank you.
podcast. And I wish you well, and I look forward
Thank
to
you.
the research and how that all pans out. And as I said,
Yes.
I'll be keen to bring you back and find out more about it,
Yeah.
and hopefully we can roll it out in our clinic as well. If
Yeah.
you are,
Watch this space. Thank you so much.
if you are looking for obviously participants and stuff like that, do feel free to let us know, and we can help
I
out the
will.
best as we can.
Fantastic. Yeah, I will absolutely take you up on that, Archie. Thank you.
Excellent.